This is a typical resin trap vacuum pump set up for infusion. The resin trap is intended to provide a volume to catch any resin that comes from the part down through these tubes, provide a safety volume to prevent resin rising to the point where it can go down this tube and off into the vacuum pump. If it gets into the vacuum pump, the pump will almost certainly seize. At the very best, you'll have a major clean-up job involved to get the pump working again. At the worst, the job will be so difficult that you'll just end up throwing the pump away. So it's really critical not to overfill the resin trap beyond the point where there's any chance of resin getting up into the vacuum pump. This particular trap has a steel lid, steel body, so obviously you can't see the resin inside there. Where the resin level is pure guesswork. Some trap makers will replace this lid with either clear acrylic or clear polycarbonate, and they work fine for a while, but they tend to obscure or crack with continued exposure to resin solvents. So they tend to be somewhat short-term solutions. So now what I will do is just move this to one side and bring in a couple of examples of resin from our Rogues Gallery. These are a couple of examples of resin in our Rogues Gallery, things we've collected from problems that have come to us. This particular one here clearly was resin coming from a part with an air leak. You can see how much the resin volume has expanded because of the air, probably by a factor of 3 to 1, but certainly enough to expand the resin right up into the trap lid. This example here, there was probably no air or very little air coming from the part, but what's happened is there's such a large body of resin that it's quite heavy as well. It's such a large body of resin that it's actually exothermed and then foamed up once it's been in the trap. Actually, this particular sample also caught fire, but again right up into the trap lid. So as you can imagine, this sort of material, either this one or this one, were they to get to a vacuum pump, it would be almost certain death for the vacuum pump. In the next video scene, we will show you that you can deal with these problems, you can see these things happening and you can deal with them. A key part of a vacuum is the resin trap lid with the viewport that sits here on top of the resin trap. I'll now take it off and take a closer look at the design details of the trap lid. So there's the trap lid there. In the centre is this generous sized glass viewport, 3 inches in diameter or 75 millimeters. The top of the viewport is protected with this small transparent PVC shield, and on the underside we have a much larger one which extends right to the outside of the trap. The purpose of this shield is to collect any resin spatter on the underside of the lid. If this becomes obscured through too much spatter, this is very simply removed. You just pull these tubes off, flick this off and put on a new one, push the tubes back over it, and they are all nice and clean again. So back to the top of the lid. Around the lid, or around the viewport, are 8 penetrations through the trap lid. In this case, 7 of them are being used for tubing connections, and the 8th one is used for an illumination port, and I'll show you that in a minute. In this case, two of the tubing connections have tubes in them, these 2. The other 5 have been plugged off. In practice, you can use any number of available tubing connections. You can have as many tubes as you like. If you don't need them all, it's a simple matter of just putting these plugs in and tightening the gland nut. Now to have a look at the illumination port, I'll put it on the side first, or flat first. So there's the LED torch. We've just modified it with this little stand. Push that over the trap lid like that. The end result, if I turn it around this way, turn it on, and there you can see how you could illuminate inside the trap. So there we have it, the Vacuum resin trap lid. Excellent visibility of the trap contents through the viewport, plenty of room for tubing connections, and very easy to clean on the underside. Now let's see the benefits of the viewport and the LED torch in the flesh. We'll show you how with a viewport you can see this sort of problem developing. You can see the resin foaming. We're going to simulate the effect using waste oil from this drum. We'll pull it up through this polyethylene tube and down into the resin trap, and in a moment we will shift the camera and look into the viewport just to show you that there is a real benefit of having a viewport and a torch to see this sort of problem developing.
Yep.
You'll see that the oil entering the trap is foaming. This is the result of air and water in the oil expanding under vacuum. If an infusion goes well, there'll be little foaming because the air and water vapour should have been removed ahead of the resin front. However, if the infusion is rushed, or if there is an air leak into the bag, the resin can foam up, as we can see here, or as you saw in our Rogues Gallery example earlier. Without a viewport, safely dealing with foam like this is difficult. The problem is that you might think there's a relatively small amount of resin coming into the trap, but in fact its volume expansion is great and it fills up the trap far quicker than you'd anticipate. If you do see this problem developing, there is a way to overcome it. If you've got a viewport, you see that you've got a problem and you know you have to change the catch pot. So what you can do is, while it's all under vacuum, you can clamp the tubes off and you can stop the resin flow into the trap. You can then release the vacuum. You could then lift it, a bit easier if there was two people, you could lift the lid off, take the old catch pot out, put a new one in, then resume pumping. When you get back to the vacuum you were at before, you can then open the clamps again and you can resume resin flow into the trap. The part will resume infusing again, and so you can see that as long as you can see what's happening in there, you can deal with the problem. So this one little piece of glass helped by a torch can make a big difference to the success of an infusion, and of course it will protect the vacuum pump from this sort of problem.